been a while. I've been the intrepid traveler the last month or so, 2 months. Just got back from jolly good England to visit my sister, brother-in-law, and nephew. Have some funny stories, interesting places to talk about, but that'll be a while from now. I voted today, and I am Raboso. Raboso is a grape from Venice, and Raboso literally means angry. I thought that was a fitting wine to drink today. Angry in that the early grapes assault the senses. Tastes better when it's had some time to mellow out. Good life lessons. Anyway, today we are talking about one of my favorite authors, and I thought it was appropriately timed. Brendan Slocumb. Brendan Slocumb has a lot in common with me. Majored in music education, specializing in violin and viola, and has been teaching for 20 years in a classroom setting, guitar classes, orchestra, private lessons, whatnot. We're currently in my home studio, as you can see, very well used, very well loved. We've got our solfege up there. We got our blue Beethoven up here. We got our Bach autograph on the arm and our Post-its. I felt it was timely to talk about him today, partly because I did reach out to him and ask if it was okay if I talked about him on my YouTube channel. But the state of things in our country right now, I haven't lost hope. I feel like we are in the greatest period of empathy that we've ever been in at large. But because of things in politics right now, people, for the first time in 60, 70 years, have felt free to broadcast their bigotry and their racism and their misogyny. And people like me are here to put a stop to that. Brendan's done some amazing things. I first wanted to talk about the suspense angle of his books. He actually has a pretty amazing story, a life story in general, so highly recommend checking him out. BrendanSlocumb.com has all the information you need. He claims that music saved his life when he was, in middle school, rehearsing for orchestra and practicing Dvorak. His classmates were getting arrested for breaking into homes. He says music has saved my life for sure. Gave him opportunities that he wouldn't otherwise have had, which is a pretty inspiring story to listen to, but also an angering one. I think, my God, I thought we were so far beyond this, and the reverting back to things that our predecessors have worked so hard to fight for, and that we're yet again in the swing of those things is really upsetting to me. Makes me very verboso. If you see the camera shaking, that's because Annie is checking out my tripod. He graduated, like I said, with a music education degree. Has been doing things similar to myself for the last 20 years. And COVID happened, and he had nothing to do. He was doing virtual classes, had an idea for a novel. He wrote it in 2 months. Publisher was on board, and by the time it was published in 2022, it was an instant New York Times bestseller. I admit that I was drawn to it partly because of the suspense angle, the classical music angle, where the layperson may not get all of the references. It involves, again, a young Black man in the South with not the same resources as his classmates, and was gifted his great-great-grandfather's fiddle that was given to him by his master when he was freed, and said, "You've played this better than I ever could." It turns out to be a Stradivarius, which, if you don't know, is the most famous, well-made violin in history, per the experts. Not many of them remain, and they're invaluable. They're priceless. So you can imagine the shock of this young Black man who is on scholarship in college for his violin playing. and the craziness that ensues. I was really, really moved by this book. I actually, again, it's called The Violin Conspiracy, released in 2022. Was weeping within the first 2 pages. Again, I'm an empathetic person. I put myself in situations of uncomfortability because I want to know. Middle-class white woman in America who has her own problems, but I want to know what other groups of people have gone through and honor their history and the things that have happened to them. So moving from the start, very much whodunit, at the edge of your seat. I think I read it in one day. But I think the genius of Brendan's writing is that he includes his personal experiences. So you're not just reading a whodunit, you're reading about his life in high school and the racism and class issues that he had dealt with in his own life, which is always a moving thing. I wish everyone would read this book. It was very well done. Second book that came out, and this is when I got to meet him personally, Symphony of Secrets. Incredible read. I actually got it via Libby the day before the author event, so I was able to read it before going to the talk and meeting him personally. Again, a really moving story laced with his truth throughout, about a neurodivergent Black woman in the 20s and 30s who was taken advantage of by a famous jingle writer turned pop composer who ended up having this very illustrious career involving orchestras, operas, and whatnot. In the plot line, I don't want to get too much more into, but for the first time in my life, and I'm not even kidding, in my life, I thought of George Gershwin differently. In the classical realm, George Gershwin was treated as like the cool kid in classical music, one of the first ones who incorporated jazz into his orchestral writing. And again, very similar to the storyline in the book, this pop guy done right, reaching incredible stardom. And for the first time in my life, I actually took a step back and thought about that. He did appropriate every single one of those jazz chords. He didn't have that. He was the one making money off of Black music. And that, as far as I know, was the first time that it occurred. You think of the history or the assimilation of African-American music and its history and where it was played, ragtime, there were white ragtime composers as well, but, to this day, there's this question of, why are you doing this? Is your heart in the right place? Like, are you celebrating this Black music, or are you appropriating this Black music for your own gain? I could talk about that all day. It's actually really fascinating to me. Great read, very fascinating. And again, another group of marginalized people, neurodivergent people, before we even knew what that even meant. Different ways of learning, being taken advantage of because they're not one but two minorities, to be Black and to be a woman. Really moving read. Again, whodunit, can't put it down. Brendan also announced, I think, about a month ago, that his third book is coming out in May of next year, The Dark Maestro, and I cannot wait. Partly because his writing is it sucks you in. It's so alliterative and so descriptive that you feel like you're there with the characters. I mean, just incredible writing. It brings to mind to me as well how creatives, I run a restaurant, I'm creative with food as well as music, but it's interesting to me to see how different creatives find new outlets for their creativity. Musicians think differently. Most of them do. Think differently than the general public. So it's really, really fascinating to me to see him in this new place. From teaching his private lessons, he's no longer teaching in the classroom because his schedule is filled with bookish things. But he still advises on the Kennedy Center board and plays for various orchestras across the country. It's fascinating. I found it myself refreshing to have a new outlet for my creativity and thinking outside the box. I think that's the thing, though, that draws me most, other than the stories of historical inequality and reparations in his books. The musical element harkens something to me. Again, I think they're enjoyable, even if you don't know all that I know. But that makes them even more enjoyable. There's few moments I can think of in all the thousands of books I've read that I felt like, oh my gosh, this book was written just for me because of the things that I've experienced in my life. And I think that's the key of a truly amazing author, is to draw people in, depending on, regardless of their circumstances. But I am truly obsessed. At Rockstar Tacos, I talk about Brendan at least once a week. And have you read this? You should definitely read this. He's one of those authors that have popped up. I mean, people have been speaking out against racism for a long time, as we know, in literature as well. There are a few that spring to mind. Recently, Percival Everett, holy cow. The Trees rocked my world. Again, I feel it necessary to hear these stories being told because that's how we don't repeat history. Newsflash, America. But basically, it's a novel about the history of lynching in our country. It's really heavy. I found myself laughing out loud from caricatures of these characters in the book, and then turning the page and crying again, because that's some really, really, really heavy stuff that's happened in our land over the last since ever. I think that's why I wanted to talk about Brendan today, was because I've been thinking and feeling very deeply about the future of our country, and I do have hope. But these are the kind of stories that need to be told and discussed and talked about. Hatred has no place in this country, and I've been really disheartened and angered to see over the last few years people free to be their hateful selves, and we as a society have to say no more. And the only way for that to go about is to keep telling these stories. The more people you reach with your stories, Brendan and others, the more of an impact you make. So in closing, I would just say, Brendan, cheers to you. I hope after your surgery, things are going well. You've made a huge impact on this white woman, and I really look forward to your future stories that are not just stories. I mean, this is important stuff to be sharing. It's an interesting tool with which to tell those stories. You're doing a great job. Please don't ever stop writing. We love your books. And hopefully next time you're in St. Louis, I would love to feed you some vegan, delicious tacos. So thanks so much for everything. Thanks everyone for listening. Find yourself a difficult book to sit with. It's made me definitely a better person over the last decade, especially. But The Trees, Percival Everett, Brendan Slocumb, Anything, The Dark Meister, coming out in May of 2025. I also just finished The Reformatory, which is a horror tale based on true events, which I also found very difficult but necessary to sit with and listen to a fictionalized tale of a true place in Florida. Really upsetting, but again, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So with that note, best of luck everyone over the next few days. I am very anxious and excited to see what happens tomorrow, but hopeful for the future. So Brendan Slocumb, check him out. He's on Insta. BrendanSlocumb.com has his full life story on there and all the things that he's been a part of. Whether you like music, mystery, thrills, history, he's the dude for you. I'm a super fan. I'll talk to you soon.